The Alabama Association of School Boards represents every school board in the state. We provide our local school board members with high-quality training, advocacy, and services they can use to help them make decisions at the local level. AASB has worked with PARCA for years to help survey Alabamians on important issues. In particular, AASB is interested in asking questions regarding education. We want to know what Alabamians think about funding education, their funding priorities, teacher compensation. This data is invaluable to us, and we know if PARCA is doing the research, it's going to be top quality. The data provided from this survey helps inform our decision making and is very useful in planning advocacy efforts with our members. PARCA is a trusted resource, and the information that we get from the survey we know is accurate and reliable.
Good morning, and welcome to the 2021 PARCA Annual Forum, Alabama Online Failure to Connect. I'm Ryan Hankins, Executive Director of PARCA. On behalf of the PARCA Board of Directors, staff, investors, and supporters, thank you for making time for these critical discussions. For many of you, this is your first time joining us. We're glad to have you. For all of us, this is the first time our annual policy forum has been multi-day and virtual. Most of you are joining us via the Whova platform on your desktop, tablet, or phone. The platform provides you the ability to access presentations and documents, read about and contact our speakers, post comments, ask questions, visit sponsors, and engage with each other. And thank you to our many sponsors whose support allows us to make this event free to everyone. You'll see our sponsors in several places on your screen and on our events sponsor section webpage. Today, we especially recognize Coldwell Banker Commercial McLean Real Estate, CLASS, the Council of Leaders in Alabama Schools, Hand Arundel Harrison Sale, and Jefferson State Community College. Thank you all. If this is your first annual forum or your 20th, I hope you know PARCA as Alabama's first and only independent, objective, nonprofit, nonpartisan research center. We provide policy research, data analysis, program evaluation, and technical assistance to state and local leaders and nonprofit leaders across Alabama. But we are also a convener, bringing together stakeholders and citizens to explore and understand complex issues facing our state and to consider solutions. It's in that spirit that we hold these annual events and why we gather today. PARCA would never write a report or host a meeting on something so broad as education or healthcare or corrections. We would surely focus on some component or aspect or facet of topics so large. But in choosing to focus on broadband, we are indeed taking a very broad, and no pun intended, a very broad look at an incredibly complex and nuanced topic. Any of the things we discussed this week, and dozens more that we don't have time to explore, could be a singular focus of many hours of conversation and pages of text. Our event could never include every voice and every perspective, every public project and private venture that seeks to connect Alabamians. Many of you joining us today could be speakers on this panel very easily. Our goal this week is simple: that we all gain more insight into the obstacles, opportunities, and complexities of broadband. That we begin to envision what full access, full adoption, full digital equity, and full digital inclusion could mean for Alabama. And we look for avenues to help us get there. We have designed this week around three basic assumptions. First, we assume that most people agree that broadband access and adoption is a significant challenge and opportunity for Alabama. If we didn't know it before the pandemic, we know it now. But I say most people because if you live in the right neighborhood or have the right job or in the right income bracket, you and most everyone you know have all the broadband capacity that you need. That's not true for everyone in our state. Only 77% of Alabama households have any internet at all, meaning 23%, almost 1 in 4, do not. Of those with internet, 14% rely solely on their phone with data caps and other restrictions. Only 57% of people with internet have a high-speed connection, like cable, DSL, or fiber. Now, 57% doesn't sound that bad, but it ranks Alabama 47th in the country, leading only Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Mississippi. Just a couple of data points like these, and there are so many more, begin to illuminate the challenges facing our schools, workforce, and our economy. Second, we assume that almost no one understands what's really meant by broadband access. We often talk about broadband and broadband access and broadband adoption as if it is a simple service that only requires a wire being run to a house or to a business or to a school. But as we will explore in the coming days, it's not nearly so simple. There's neither clarity nor agreement on what counts as broadband. How fast is fast enough? Who is really underserved? How do we best deliver these services? How do we encourage adoption and subscription? And what do we do with it? This week, we're not talking about one issue, but many issues that are lumped together under one word of broadband. These many issues require many solutions from many different partners. And third, we assume that broadband is just a tool. If every home, school, hospital, and business has all the connectivity and access and speed it wants, what do we do with it? Are the promises of broadband's ability to revolutionize education, healthcare, workforce, the economy, almost every area of our lives, are they realistic or just rhetoric? And there's too little realization that access to broadband is just one part of achieving our goal of realizing real, full digital inclusion. The tool of broadband is useless without adoption, without devices and knowledge and skills, and the purpose to put that broadband to work. So we began this week by seeking to understand what exactly we're talking about and by breaking down broadband. We are happy today to be joined by Angela Siefer, CEO of the National Alliance for Digital Inclusion based in Columbus, Ohio, and Abe Harper, PARCA board member and CEO of Harter Technologies located in Mobile. Angela, Abe, thank you for joining us. We're very happy to have you with us.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank PARCA for taking on this initiative. As Ryan mentioned, this is not a new conversation. It's not a new topic. If in any venture, any circle around our state right now, you can pick up conversations about broadband, about its relevance, and about how we increase that and what that looks like for the state of Alabama. And the topic is reaching far and wide, even to the extent that our state and national leadership have taken optics onto it and have began taking and embracing this to create more opportunities for conversation around it. I really want to applaud PARCA because this is not something easy or a simple task to take on. And as you dig into it, as Ryan mentioned, there's so many different facets to it that I don't think in a week we could cover if we wanted to. Some of our very strategic goals, though, are to have active and open conversation about it to get those things kind of brought more cohesive where communities can see it and then can begin to act upon it locally and nationally as necessary. As Ryan mentioned, my name is Abe Harper, president of Harter Technologies. We're a concierge culture-based IT company in Mobile, Alabama. And joining me today, I've got Angela Siefer, who is the executive director of the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. Angela, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about your organization?
Yeah, thanks, Abe. Thanks, Ryan and PARCA. It's fabulous that you all are doing this. I'm Angela Siefer. I'm the executive director of the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. I live in Columbus, Ohio. We got NDIA started about 6.5 years ago because there wasn't an entity representing on-the-ground digital inclusion efforts. So we represent the folks that are teaching their neighbors how to use the internet, helping them find that low-cost internet service, finding the right device for their needs, helping them with those digital tech support kinds of issues. We tend to represent community-based organizations, housing authorities, local governments, libraries, the folks that do this work. And so we are the peer-to-peer for them. And then we also do the advocacy work because we learn from what they're telling us is happening on the ground. So it's fabulous that PARCA is figuring out how to address broadband in Alabama, and that they want to have that digital equity lens on it.
Thank you. And that's extremely, extremely helpful. And it segues me right into our conversation. You know, I've owned an IT company along with my brother for 20 years now. And one of the products that I think that we tell our clients consistently that we pride ourselves on being able to provide is common language narrative. I think it's really easy to get down into the weeds on something technological, and most people kind of glaze over. They look at it, they talk about it, and then they hear those, I'm going to say it, and I think it's okay on this call, but those sexy buzzwords like digital inclusion, digital equity, adoption, broadband. For the sake of our viewers and our attendees today, Angela, I want to talk through in the first few minutes here about some of those things, and then maybe share a brief narrative. But let's start with the top level, digital divide. When we say that, what are we talking about? Because I'm from the era of get off the phone so I can use the internet, or get off the internet so I can use the phone. What does that look like, and what are we talking to our attendees about today?
Yeah, so the term digital divide is the problem. That's the term I think most folks are used to hearing. We now use the terms digital equity and digital inclusion because we want to talk about solutions. But digital divide is the idea that there are folks who don't have access to technology. And that could be a variety of situations. In fact, for those of us who are steeped in it, as you said, who are way down in the weeds, sometimes we'll talk about multiple divides. Because what if you don't have access to the internet? Well, that's one divide. What if you don't have access to fast enough internet? Well, is it the same divide or is it a different divide? And then do you have the right device? How about skills, right? And then once Internet of Things becomes more prevalent in our homes, particularly health devices, will that become another divide? Maybe it's a divide already, the telehealth divide, right? So that idea of what the problem is. And then digital equity, when we first started NDIA, those of us who've been in the field have been using those terms digital equity and digital inclusion interchangeably. And then that started to become a conversation of, wait a minute, are they actually the same thing? And so we had a group of folks, there might have been some heated discussion about what these terms mean, right? But that means folks they're passionate about what it is. And what we came to was that digital equity is the goal. This is individuals and communities having full access to information, communication technology to do whatever it is they need to do. And then digital inclusion is the how. This is the home broadband that's affordable. It's the right device for your task and your needs. It's the digital literacy. It's the tech support. And so it helps if you think of it as the goal, digital equity, the how, digital inclusion.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So if I want to be relevant, I've got to have equity. And if I want to be a part of, I need to be included. That's kind of how we can break it down for our attendees. I do want to pause for a minute here and sidebar on something I failed to mention right out of the gate, because I'm so excited about this, and I'll become a geek for the next 40 minutes on this topic. So y'all, please forgive me. But two things for a point of housekeeping. The Q&A segment is open. As we're talking through this, if a question comes into your mind, please share it on the Q&A, because we're going to circle back to that in a little while. And we do have moderators that are reading the Q&A, following up along with it. And then we'll talk through some of those conversation topics when we get to that segment of the program for today. Also, there is an official hashtag. I would be remiss if I did not mention that on a conversation about broadband, digital equity, and digital divide. PARCA Forum is the actual hashtag. So if you're talking about it on social media, or if you're sharing it with your family and your friends or in your circles, hashtag PARCA Forum, PARCA-FORUM. Okay, back to your regularly scheduled programming. I want to share an excerpt from the foreword of a book published in 1999 called The Digital Divide by MIT, written by Lloyd Morissette. And Angela's smiling because she's probably read this a million times. But what I hope to capture from this excerpt is the relevance of how fast this topography is shifting underneath us and how it changes so rapidly. This narrative was written 22 years ago at this point. And I think there's so much relevance in it because Mr. Morissette catches so much of the topic accurately, but there's a few points that show just how fast digital topography changes, and he drifts from it. So in quotes here, it says, as internet technology becomes pervasive and cheap, it will offer an enormous opportunity to diminish a different but real divide. This is the critical divide between those who can read well and take full advantage of the treasures that will be so widely available, and those who are fully literate and cannot take advantage of the easily accessible information sources. As the internet technology is diffused and bandwidth increases, there will be more use of the internet for video and audio. And this is the part where it differs. However, because of the disparities in usable bandwidth between the internet and television, the internet is unlikely to displace television sets as the preferred means of viewing video. Can I get an amen for YouTube or some video channel that's out there now? For the foreseeable future, the internet will continue to be the most hospitable to print and graphics. To use it well, one must be able to read. So, Angela, let's talk a little bit about that. That's a 21-year chasm that we're talking about. And ultimately, we've seen the broadband that's available become so relevant now that a legacy device that's become part and parcel to our households, the television, is losing ground. Give us some color to what that looks like from your seat in the world and how things are changing.
Yeah, we used to think about the internet as being this extra nice to have. And I think the pandemic has really put this spotlight on the fact that it is essential. Do you want to go to school? Better have the internet. Do you want a vaccine? Guess you better have the internet, right? You want your unemployment benefits? You're going to need the internet, right? So it's not a luxury the way it used to be. If you want to survive, you need the internet. And then, so that gets us to, well, then if that's the reality, how do we as a society then get to the solutions? And if that's the reality, how do we make sure that all of our residents are on board with that? We all know some older adults who are like, no, I am just fine the way I am, right? And that has been true for the majority of their lives. But if they want a vaccine now, right? So that gets really hard, and you don't want to push things on folks, but you also don't want them to be left out of something really important like a vaccine or unemployment benefits. So there's that balance of teaching digital literacy in a way that's relevant to folks. So what else do you care about? Do you like jazz music? Do you want to look up your health information? Let's help you do those things. So I think that the change that we're seeing is a change in the necessity of it. And then that brings us to the question of, well, then what are we going to do about making sure everybody has the tools? Because this is a tool, that everybody has this tool that they need.
Right, absolutely. And when we talk about it, I mean, it almost sounds as though it's being painted as a utility. I mean, it sounds like it's no longer optional. It sounds like we're talking about something that is as critical and essential as water, power, some type of sanitation system. You know, it doesn't sound like it's optional any longer.
It's an essential service. And with any essential service, it is up to government and our societies to make sure that everyone has access to that essential service.
And I think for everyone listening in that just heard those two keywords, government and society, especially on a PARCA forum, there's a lot more to dig into on that later in the week. Angela and I actually had a sidebar about some really unique panelists that are coming up, and I want to plant the seed and kind of hype it up a little bit, because I think it's going to be a really relevant conversation. But it talks about the cross section between broadband as well as the interactions between local, state, and federal government, and how those relationships all tie into the bigger picture of this. So we're talking about it being such an essential service. Why is it that we find so many people don't have internet in their homes? I mean, Ryan brought it to light. It's 1 in 4 households have nothing in the state of Alabama, and that paints us 47th in the nation. What types of restrictions, or how could that happen?
I think it's important to understand data points as to whether or not those data points are talking about the availability of the broadband or the subscriptions of the broadband. So the data that Ryan was using was subscription data. How many households in Alabama have subscribed to a broadband service? And I believe the data points he was using included even mobile. So even mobile, and folks aren't subscribing, right? So, oh my gosh, it is heartbreaking that the numbers are that high. the difference between those is that when it's an availability issue, this is an issue that's easier to grasp, right? Like physically, you can go touch the wires, right? And if those wires aren't there, there's no broadband, right? Or there's no tower there, there's no broadband. So it's a physical infrastructure that you can in fact touch. But then when it's a subscription issue, are folks adopting broadband by subscribing to it? I know that was multiple jargony words. I apologize for that. So if folks aren't subscribing to the broadband service, why aren't they subscribing to the broadband service? The reasons research tells us, the reasons folks don't subscribe, it's expensive. That's a reality. Folks are like, look, this is just too much money. I have to feed my kids, so this is not going to happen. Digital literacy skills. And this goes back to that question of, oh, it's not important to me. Because if you don't have the digital literacy skills, it's going to intimidate you. And then you're going to say, I don't need it. But that's related to the fact that you don't have digital literacy skills. So it's intimidating, it's scary. All of us have gone through times where something with technology has frustrated us. And we were like, just throw this thing out the window, right? But you can't, because you rely upon it every day. So the barriers are the cost of the internet, the cost of a device, and then the digital literacy skills and the tech support.
Awesome. So it sounds like it really boils down to affordability and the ability to be able to actually engage the device once they have it in front of them. And, you know, I think you struck on a point, which is something I've had conversation with people around the state on. The pandemic, it's underscored so many weaknesses in infrastructure and so many different things that we as society could do better and come together better within. And I think broadband was one of those. You know, I say it very cautiously, but I stand firmly behind it. I believe that we would be in a full economic depression if we did not have a digital means of maintaining a way of life as we faced and confronted social distancing and taking necessary steps to prevent casualties as a result of the pandemic. In your world, what does that look like? And you know, obviously we're speculative here, but if broadband didn't exist, are we looking at a year 2000 fear level event that could have happened? You know, everyone would fear that in the year 2000, your computer was going to roll over, the clock was going to change, and suddenly, poof, everything that you had saved on AOL was going to be gone for years. I mean, is that a reality, you think? And to the people, this is a two-part question, is that a reality? And then to the people that don't have access to broadband, is that their reality?
I think that is their reality, Abe. It's a situation where those of us who have it, it has become so interwoven into everything, right? Our work, our health. At the end of my workday, I've been on the computer so much I don't want to be back on my computer. But because of the pandemic, if I want some new shoes, that's really my best option, is to go back to my computer. So I'm kind of stuck there because of the pandemic. But I also realize that I have the possibility of using my computer to do those things, right? And if I didn't, then how do I get my needs met? How do I, do my banking if I don't want to go into the bank? So the challenge, I think, is for us those of us who have it, it's hard for us to think about what it's like to not have it and to not have it regularly. It's different if you're going on vacation, you're like, okay, I'm just gonna turn it off for a bit. But if you don't have it regularly, I can't imagine taking my child to a school parking lot to do her homework. I have 2 in college, I have 1 still at home, she's 10, and I just cannot fathom, like, how do I get my work done if I'm sitting in a parking lot with her, right? Would I be doing this with you while she's in the parking lot? Right. So
that's what the backgrounds are for, right?
when solutions are being created that are not as good as what the rest of us have in terms of participating in education or work or health, it is not only hurting, like for example, if that child were to do their homework in the parking lot, it's not only hurting that child, but then it influences that child's whole family. And then of course it influences her moving forward in life. And those solutions of putting Wi-Fi in a parking lot, it makes sense as a stopgap measure when there's no infrastructure available, when that broadband infrastructure isn't in a rural area. That's a innovative solution. In an urban area where it's a matter of cost, we got to do better.
That's right. That's right. Well, and I'm gonna sidebar here and share a transparent story with our attendees. I think I shared it with you and Ryan last week, but you know, the relevance of internet, and we become spoiled. I've done simple things. You know, it is a commodity, but by virtue of being in a it started as a commodity. It is very much a part and parcel of life. I honestly, without internet, don't have a job, if I'm being totally transparent and honest at this moment. But I've locked myself out of my house because my garage door opener is internet controlled on more than one occasion. You know, I've been in the wilderness trying to have a weekend of disconnect and realized that my cell phone and its broadband were the only thing connecting me to my bank, so that I could let them know that I'm actually not in my normal area. And when my services were stopped, I had no way to communicate that because I had gone to a remote area where I thought, oh, this is great, there's no internet here. Not quite. So, you know, that kind of segues us into a big, broad topic. The latest coronavirus relief package that has been pressed forward contains some substantial concessions for an emergency broadband relief or a stopgap for households without. Talk to us a little bit about that, because I don't know that a lot of people know about it or how to engage it or even that it exists.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the last stimulus package, Congress passed that it includes $3.2 billion for what they're calling an emergency broadband program. So this is a $50 subsidy, 75 on tribal lands per household who are eligible, which is a mostly low income criteria. This is important because it's the first time the federal government has said, yes, cost is a barrier. It's also important because the internet service providers were supportive of this initiative. So this was this unique time when public interest and internet service providers were completely aligned. We have to celebrate those wins when we have them, right? And we were completely aligned on the need for this emergency broadband benefit. It is short term. When that $3.2 billion is gone, it's on. And so that just leads us to the fact that we need a permanent broadband benefit, but we should make the most of this while we have it. And Abe, I think you're exactly right that folks won't know it exists. The rules have just been released on Friday, so we're all still figuring out what those rules mean. The program isn't live yet. It will be live in 60 days from Friday, so a little less than 60 days. And it's important for the community, institutions and organizations that serve low-income populations, whether they're urban, rural, suburban, tribal, wherever, to know about the benefit and help folks sign up. Because if we can get folks using any of the services, particularly those that will then could have the potential to roll into a discount offer, all the larger providers have discount offers for low-income populations. So if we can get more folks signed up for the subsidy and then whenever possible, be able to help them then keep it through a discounted offer, that would be the ultimate. But what is really necessary is that the folks that already serve the disadvantaged populations understand fully what this offer is so they can help them. And this is the part where the community needs to just like jump in with both boots, is to have folks who understand it at such a level that they can one by one guide their community members through signing up. The reality is any government program is not going to be super simple. I mean, they're going to do their best, but we should all be realistic, right? And the other thing I think that's super important is that sometimes the cost is one factor that's interwoven with another barrier. So like the digital literacy, yes, it's expensive and I don't know how to use it. So why would I spend money on something that's expensive when I really think, you know, it's just too much for me. And oh, I'm worried about privacy, right? Like there's all these issues that get connected to digital literacy. And so if we have members that are in the community who understand not only that emergency broadband benefit, but also understand where those digital literacy resources are, or who has cheap or free devices that you can get into the hands of this household. Who is that person that serves as the digital navigator that can point folks and pull them in and connect them?
So I think you used a word there that I've heard before, and I love it, digital navigator. Let's talk a little bit about that, because I call Harter Technology a digital navigator of sorts in our area. But I think people get the perception that they have to go to a specific outlet to find a digital navigator. Elaborate a little bit on that from your experience and perspective.
Yeah, so when the pandemic started, we had already started within NDIA in our community. So we have 500 plus affiliates spread around the US who are all independent, and they own and operate their own digital inclusion programs. And so right at the beginning of the pandemic, we were already starting to have these conversations about the fact that there needs to be a person that is part of a community organization that folks can turn to when they want to talk about any variety of the barriers, the signing up for the broadband, the device, the digital literacy, the tech support. And then there needs to be this person. But then when the pandemic hit, we were like, oh my gosh, we need to we need to full-fledged go into this. And it's not somebody who's helping online necessarily. It needs to be over the phone, because you can't have this person sitting in the library with you. You know, at the beginning of the pandemic, that was definitely not in the cards. So then when we started asking around amongst our affiliates, it was already happening organically. Those who had been doing digital inclusion work for years were already figuring out how to provide that same service one by one, not necessarily in a class, over the phone, enough so to get them into an online class, right? But if you can't expect someone who's not using the internet to just jump on Zoom and start learning how to use the internet. That's a little insane. And so now what we've started to realize is that if we can have more of these digital navigators at that community level, because they need to be in an institution that's already trusted, because technology is intimidating. Free broadband sounds like a scam. So you have to make sure that you have folks that are going to be trusted by the population that you're trying to reach. And if these digital navigators can then help lead that community member through all the different pieces and the barriers, and then send them off on a path either with the library or another community-based organization that provides digital literacy training, it's a way to get at the solution that recognizes the barriers aren't the same for everyone.
So, I kind of queued a thought up for me. I remember growing up, my grandmother and grandfather were early adopters of internet in the capacity of, I'm going to speak geek here for a second, but having a 1900 baud dial-up modem in their home in 1995. And I remember as he transitioned, my grandfather's no longer with us, rest in peace, but as he transitioned from the low bandwidth of a dial-up modem and using AOL, and that was his daily go-to activity. He had been retired for years. AOL was his most, that was his excitement for the day. He'd go check his email and get something from his cousin or brother in Colorado. But as he transitioned from that to a DSL circuit, the number of times I got phone calls at home after school or when I was back home from college to come and fix his broken internet, it was, I guess you could call it an early stage digital navigator. And I think that's the part that people are in need of now, is someone still to create that translation from geek to English to make it where it's relevant.
Yes. Hey, Abe, we have a question in the Q&A that I think would help for us to address, asking about the lack of infrastructure.
Yes.
And so what we haven't really been clear about so far, I think, is that yes, there is a lack of infrastructure in Alabama, and that needs to be addressed. And you're going to hear a lot about that in the coming days, about how to exactly get at that. But that what we're suggesting right now is that it can't be only about the lack of infrastructure. That has been the dominant, that's where the federal money goes right now, right? This $3.2 billion for emergency broadband benefit, first time we've had federal money addressing affordability. All the federal money goes towards deployment of the infrastructure. So that's really important. And so what we're suggesting is it needs to be both that and the digital equity wrapped together at the same time. We can't only work on one and then work on the other.
So with that 3.2 billion that's out there, is that only for utilization for a temporary fix, or are states at liberty, or do we know enough about the regulation now that they can use that for permanent solutions? Because I think what I hear you saying is that infrastructure lack is a problem. To me, it's kind of I won't say a no-brainer, but it makes more sense to invest that into something durable, because this is not going away, right? This is going to be with us for the remainder of our generations.
Right. We need to make sure that we're investing in both at the same time, that we're investing in that infrastructure. And when we invest in the infrastructure, we need to make sure that it is affordable. There's two different kinds of affordable for us to think about. There's market rate affordable. So this is there enough competition out there in the market that middle income folks can afford it? And then has going to have to be subsidized for low income folks, kind of affordable. Right, so that there's a subsidized one that's for low income populations, and then a market rate that is more affordable than what we have right now. We do not have market rate affordable for most folks. And so the tricky part is getting at both of those at the same time. We do have federal funding that's outside of that 3.2 billion through the FCC, through agriculture. Some of the states are doing specific money for infrastructure deployment. That's fabulous. There's talk of a potential infrastructure package from Congress. There'd be more money for infrastructure. This emergency broadband benefit is one way to get at affordability. Another way for us to get at that affordability piece is when we build new networks, are we making sure that there's affordable options wrapped into those new networks? And this can be specific to neighborhoods, like if there's low income housing, right, that we make sure that we're extending the wires to that area and that they have a particular rate available for them in that area. It can be that the certain populations are eligible for a discount rate. But if we keep what we've been doing in the United States is building networks and not addressing affordability in any way, and right. That is clearly, the pandemic showed us that is not a solution that's working.
So, and in that vein, I've heard the term digital redlining used before. Is that still a really viable concern? And is that an immediate concern for us? Are there areas that providers or entities are looking at and just saying, you know what, it's not worth our investment to go to that area, and they're avoiding it? Is that part of the big picture here too?
It's definitely part of the big picture. And I think it's a matter of us being honest about the fact that in the United States, broadband is a commodity, right? It is this thing that we buy and sell. It is a service that we purchase. It is very lightly regulated. It is not the kind of thing where it's nobody's job right now to make sure that everyone has access, right? And when that happens, yes, a company is going to, and there's no blame in this. This is just fact, right? You're gonna roll out your service where you're going to get the highest return, the quickest highest return. And if we as a society decide that we need a different answer, then we all need to decide what those different answers are, because what we have right now isn't meeting everybody's needs because it's a market, right? And that's just the reality of it. And so if you're low income, they may assess that low income neighborhood isn't going to get the highest return. If you're rural, going to assess you're not going to get the highest return.
Right, and we've got that segues me into, and let's see, we've got another question here, and I think we'll be able to tie that into this next segment. So I'm going to answer it live. You know, we've got peers around us that are doing things, but more importantly, what does a roadmap to succession on that look like? Because you know, this is an issue that doesn't sound like it's going to be only owned by the state of Alabama at the local level, at the state level, or at the federal level with Congress and the Senate. Where does the ownership and the role of responsibility fall?
Yeah, it falls everywhere. This is definitely the kind of issue where it's not solely on one entity's plate. So if we think about the pandemic, a lot, you know, where it ended up a lot of times at the schools. Why are schools in charge of broadband? But that's what it was, because it just landed on their plates. They had to figure it out if they wanted their kids to be able to continue to be educated. Families were on their own, were having to figure out the answer to that. So yes, it is local governments, state governments, federal governments, but it's also any industry that is positively impacted by folks being on the internet, health, finance, retail, they need to all be in the same room figuring out solutions at that local, state, federal level because it benefits them.
Right, right. And it's interesting to me that this has been an ongoing and has been a consistent conversation. But just in wrapping up, I see Ryan's rejoined us here. What does it look like for our peers that are near us? Because I think that's irrelevant. And the question is, we're number 47. How do we keep moving up that line and keep improving it? What does that look like?
The state of North Carolina has someone in their state broadband office who is an expert in broadband adoption. She does the work with local governments. She conducts the research. She knows what their data is. She does the coordination, right? Every state needs someone like her who can figure out how does she connect folks, right? She's often that matchmaker. Oh, you should talk to you, right? Like those types of who's doing that? Who's the one educating the other state agencies as to why digital equity is essential, why they can't put everything on their website and think folks will just show up and use it, right? Who's that voice?
Well, I am going to interrupt this conversation. I'm sorry to do that, but we actually have a fair number of questions that I want to make sure that we get to. So I'm going to throw a few questions out and want to try to cover as many as we can. So first, we'll kind of work a little bit backwards. You've mentioned the concept of digital navigator, which may be a new idea for many in our audience. Is it a best practice that navigator is provided by the state or at the city level or county level? Where does that originate?
This concept of the digital navigator is so new, where there's not a lot of best practices yet. So I welcome Alabama to create some of the best practices.
I think we can make them up is what I'm hearing you say.
Totally make them up. We have seen it though at the local level. We've seen it at the state level. The state level version is newer. It was created at the local level. That's where the best practices are right now, but that's only because that's where they originated. We just on NDIA's website, most of what I'm talking about is on our website, digitalinclusion.org. There's a whole page that is the digital navigator model. We set it up as an open source model. So we help particular affiliates and clients. We coordinate the work of the affiliates. We write it all up and we put it out there for anyone to use. So you don't even have to talk to us. You can just grab it and run. If you need more help, give us a holler.
So we have a question about net neutrality. And while we might not be sure what that means, is that something that could promote more direct investment, or is it completely unrelated to the topics we're discussing?
It is definitely related. It becomes down to, do we think of the internet service as being an information service or a communication service? And who does it benefit to have it defined as one or the other? So internet service providers are more comfortable with not having net neutrality because it gives them more flexibility to run their businesses the way they want to. Is it what's best for folks on the ground, for communities? Right? So it definitely impacts who has what broadband, and it also impacts the way we regulate broadband. Because if we don't have net neutrality, then the FCC doesn't have the authority to get involved. That, of course, is more comfortable for the internet service providers. They don't want anyone in their business. But is it what's best for our communities?
So by definition, we need the internet service providers. Someone's got to provide the internet somehow. And what I have realized in planning for this event is there are many different organizations, many different providers, traditional large telecoms, small regional telecoms, utility companies, local efforts, a lot of people working to provide what, as you described earlier, as a commodity. One, how do we accomplish the goals you're talking about? Because we need all those partners working together, I assume. And how do we create an environment where the roles and responsibilities, the lanes are a little more clear as to who is providing what, and the niches for these various providers and how they operate? How do we move from a competitor to a little more? The question I'm getting at from one of our attendees is this market destined to be competitive highly competitive forever, or is there room for competition between those that appear to be competing businesses to try to achieve these goals that we have for broadband connectivity and adoption?
I would say right now, we don't have much of a competitive market because the services coming from different providers are so significantly different. In any market, you're likely to have a telecom and maybe a cable. So you're lucky if you have a duopoly, right? And then in some places, you also have cell service. Well, is the broadband from your cell service equitable to the broadband from your telecom or your cable company? I wouldn't rely upon my cell service for my broadband. I can't imagine the unlimited data, in air quotes, that would be the package that would be required, because they all have unlimited data. That's not really unlimited. In order to meet my broadband needs, right? I need that wireline connection into my home to make sure that I can have enough broadband to do what it is I need to do. So the competitive nature of it is still, it's one of those things that we have to look at really clearly. And I know you guys are going to dig into this in the next couple of days. And I encourage all the participants, even though it seems weedy and it seems kind of like too much at times, to dig in, because the more that regular folks and members of the community and leaders in the community understand it, then we can have these in-depth discussions and not rely upon someone else to make these decisions for us.
And Ryan, if I can tag onto that with an industry perspective just a little bit too, from the IT world side that I'm in at the local level in the state, there's a really significant head start that entities will have in certain jurisdictions, which makes it extremely difficult for competition to occur. So as this conversation is ongoing later in the week, I'd strongly encourage attendees to kind of lean in, like Angela said, lean in on that topic of competition and learn about franchise agreements and about regulatory hurdles that impede it becoming much more competitive, because as more players enter the market, the price goes down, the options go up, and then it becomes highly available. The other side of that is it's one of those things that's so gristly that nobody really knows how to wrap their hands around it from a regulatory standpoint. You're starting to see even a decentralized regulatory approach to telecom because of voice over IP and how much harder it is to regulate the ones and zeros of voice over IP versus an analog POTS line that we're used to from prior days, or a Centrex system. So just from the industry side, that's a big ball of wax, right? And I mean, it's something that we're going to have to dig in and grab a hold of and slowly start melting away at.
So Angela, as you were discussing equity and inclusion, say a little bit more about what some of the skills are that an individual, the end user as it were, what skills do they need to really take advantage of broadband? Perhaps skills that seem self-evident to us, but we've not thought about and are stumbling blocks for many in our state.
Right. If I encourage everyone, as you're doing things with your computer and online, to think about those things in terms of how did you know how to do that thing, right? How did you recognize what a URL looks like? What is that HTTP? Why does it matter if it's there or if it's not there when you're looking at a URL? What is a .com versus a .org versus a .gov? If you get something from a census, doesn't matter if it says .gov at the end. Oh yeah, otherwise it's probably not really from the census, right? But so some of us know that, right? And then that influences how we use the internet, and it makes us feel confident that we know how to use the internet. None of us are 100% safe, but we have that level of understanding. Things like using email in a way that's professional. There at some point in our lives, we figured that out, right? If you have a young person in your life and you've seen them craft an email, you're like, oh, that's not how you do it. Please use punctuation. But if you haven't been in that environment, then you don't necessarily know that that's the way to do it. So the digital literacy skills are, it's everything, right? It's functioning online in a way that keeps you safe, and it gives you enough confidence to figure out the next task. So even if I don't know how to use that vaccine sign up website, I've used enough websites where I've had to sign up for something else. then I can assume that I can figure it out. But if I haven't been signing up for other things, right, if I haven't used other platforms to sign up for something, then it may really intimidate me.
So Abe, you remind us, Abe, how long Harper Technologies has been in operation?
December 31, 2002.
So that's what, several generations in terms of tech and broadband. So
Right.
congratulations on your longevity in this market.
Thank you.
I also know that you serve on the governor's task force for innovation.
That's right.
I believe that's the right name for that.
Yeah. Innovate Alabama.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm curious about some who might fear that government intervention, government action in this space at the federal or state level is a disincentive that would crowd out providers or crowd out the private market. What your reaction to that concern is, and how we find that right balance for public action in a private market.
So I think you nailed it right there, Ryan. Innovate Alabama's task is to identify policy or lack thereof that is impeding the state's growth technologically, and that's across the areas of workforce, education, and access to service. So what that looks like from a top-down approach, the mission that the governor shared with us was identifying where the weaknesses are, either in policies that currently exist that don't create a competitive environment, or where the lack of policy is, where there should be policy around it to help create a more competitive environment. There's not a balance right now, unfortunately. And I could name jurisdiction after jurisdiction where there are franchise agreements where only one service provider is allowed to service that jurisdiction. In Alabama, that's a disaster, because now residents of that market don't have an option. They are landlocked to one service provider, and you'll get a couple of people that come through and try and offer a wireless solution. Angela nailed it earlier. You need a hardline connection, at least to proximate areas, to get the service at the quality it needs to be at for it to be, contiguous and reliable. So I don't really fear a government intervention of overstepping boundaries at this point, because I don't think there's much regulation around it at all. I think the right conversation is how do we craft that conversation where both the private and public sectors are talking together about putting guardrails in place that don't allow a monopoly in a market, but also encourage private providers to come in and be competitive. Don't just come in and, throw in an infrastructure and try to be the monopoly. Come in and be a good player, be a good citizen of the market. So I'm not worried about it at this moment. That could change. You know how that goes with policy. But at this moment, everything looks really good from the way that we're approaching it, I think. Up, you're muted. Almost made it through the whole meeting.
I was so close. But I've not coughed. So there's that. Angela, Abe, we want to thank you for your time this morning. Thank you for enlightening us, frankly, for further confusing the conversation and planning up a lot of ground that we'll have to dig into in these next couple of days. We know that Abe will be back with us. I think perhaps Abe and Angela will both be sitting in on some of the sessions. If you are joining us via the Whova app, you are able to reach out to them and connect with them. I know they'll both be happy to, I presume they'll both be happy to visit with you and answer any further questions. I apologize if we couldn't get to all the questions and comments that we had this morning. But again, thank you both for giving us a great foundation, covering a lot of information that was probably new to, I know, to me and probably to many of us on the call. I think you've given a great foundation for our week. I hope you will all again join us tomorrow, 11 o'clock via the same platform, where we will explore obstacles to broadband in Alabama. Thank you all and have a wonderful day.